Hello and welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. In the meantime, please feel free in the chat to let us know where you're joining us from and let us know what podcast or album you listen to while you're focused in and trying to get a whole bunch of work done. So we'd love to hear it. I'm seeing full service marketing agency, retail oriented podcast, instrumental pop music. Love that. DMI and AMA favorite podcast. Love that as well. We'll give it just another second or so, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Again, for those of you who are just now joining us, feel free to let us know in the chat where you're joining us from and what your favorite album or podcast is to listen to while you're doing focused work. So we'll go ahead and get started. All right, again, hello and welcome to today's webinar, How Digital Marketers Should Prepare for Third-Party Cookie Deprecation, sponsored by ObservePoint. My name is Jasmine Winley from the American Marketing Association. And before we officially get started, I do want to point out that there is a Q&A box you can put questions into for the Q&A that will be at the end of this session. And you can also continue to participate and network here in the chat. This session will be recorded and will be available on demand right here in this platform. You will be receiving an email within 24 hours with the link to access this content on demand. And with that, I'm very excited to introduce to you today's speaker, Cameron Cowan, the Senior Director of Product Strategy at ObservePoint, Dave Smith, the Chief of Information Technology at ObservePoint, and Karen Bellin, the Vice President of Data Analytics and Insight at NP Digital. Welcome, Cameron, Dave, and Karen.
Thanks, Jasmine.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Dave, I'll formally introduce you in a second, but I didn't get a chance to see the chat part. As far as what you listen to when you're trying to chill out and get work done, did you have an answer to an album or a podcast?
Anything without lyrics.
Anything mostly, without lyrics?
Yeah, something that doesn't distract me.
Nice. Karen, how about you?
I love Spotify's DJ and then the new day list feature, letting the algorithm pick my music is fine with me. So that's usually what I zone out to.
Awesome. Yeah, I've really got hooked on this new, there's a piano station on YouTube where you can actually see the person playing the piano and it lights up almost like you're playing a video game, but you can listen to classical music that way. It's fantastic. All right, well, welcome everybody. My name is Cameron Cowan and I run product strategy here at ObservePoint. I'm excited to be the moderator for today's discussion. Just to set some ground rules and expectations. If you were coming in expecting to see a whole bunch of charts and bulleted lists and you want me to share the slides, I have a secret for you. I'm not going to share the slides, and it's not because I don't love you. It's because this is a discussion. We don't want to inundate you with slideware, but we want to have an open and frank discussion about a topic that apparently is really important to a lot of marketers. Fantastic turnout for today's webinar, and excited to have this discussion with both Dave and Karen. Now, with Dave, a quick introduction from him. He's the Chief Technology Officer here at ObservePoint. Dave's been in this space for, what, a couple of decades now, Dave? Is that right? Building and delivering software? Why don't you give us just a little bit of an overview of who is ObservePoint and what is your role within the company?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Cameron. So ObservePoint is a product that allows, among others, digital marketers to scan their websites to be able to measure whether they are complying with the standards that they have for their own websites. So we do a deep scan of all your pages, and it'll tell you things like which analytics tags do you have on your site, which marketing tags. We identify over 1,000 different technologies. And also compliance issues, like which cookies do I have on my sites? Which geographies are my pages sending data to? And many, many other questions that we help. And of course, Google's plans to phase out third-party cookies are right at the forefront of our attention at the beginning of 2024 here as we enter a new world where this will not be there. And of course, ObservePoint's got your back with a lot of product features that will help you manage this transition.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dave. And Karen, as the VP of Data Analytics and Insight over at MP Digital, tell us a little bit about MP Digital, who you're helping out in the world, and what your role is at the organization there.
Sure. So at NP Digital, we consider ourselves the alternative to the agency status quo. We're a global, independently owned performance marketing agency. We have some technologies that you might be familiar as well, like Uber Suggest, but we also have agencies all around the globe. I focus on enterprise and global businesses at NP Digital in the US. And then we also have a division for small business called NP Excel. I've been working in data analytics for many decades, well, a couple decades, and just excited to see how the space is changing and have opportunity to try new things, and excited to discuss that with everyone today.
Fantastic. Thanks, Karen. Yeah, we're excited to have both Dave and Karen's expertise, one coming from more of a technical expertise, building software and delivering that to the market. Karen helping lots of brands worldwide prepare for and adapt to an ever-changing digital world. Now, to prime the pump, I would expect most of the listeners today know what a cookie is, kind of are familiar with the digital ecosystem, but just to get us ready for that discussion, Dave, can you give us just a quick description of what is a cookie? And I know I've heard you give a brief history of where cookies came about and what they do on the internet today. Can you give us a little bit of that overview?
Yes, I'm going to keep this as brief as possible to only focus on what digital marketers need to know about cookies and third-party cookies. So the cookie was invented to solve a very specific problem, which is how do we keep track of users who come back to your website a subsequent time? Maybe they come today and they come again tomorrow, and we want to know that that's the same person. This is the fundamental problem that the cookie was invented to solve well over 20 years ago. Actually, I think we're pushing 30 years on the creation of the cookie. And so that's great. It's a useful little piece of technology. All it is a little piece of text that gets stored on your computer by your web browser. The same exact technology functions in almost exactly the same way, whether you're on a desktop computer or on your phone in a web browser. So I told you that it's the way that we track users between visits. So what is a third-party cookie? What do you need to know about that? Well, cookies help you track visits, users between visits on the same site, but by the same token, they can also keep track of users across different sites. So like, let's say if you participate in an advertising network where you place ads across multiple different domains, and you want to know when someone shows up on one of these websites that they've been to other websites that might inform your decision as an ad vendor, like an ad platform like Google, might inform your decision on what kind of ad is most relevant to them, and therefore most likely to lead to a click or an engagement, and therefore most likely to drive up your advertising revenue as well as your marketing effectiveness, and not just wasting showing pixels on the screen and maybe even paying for them for someone who has no interest in that. And so, a great example of this would be a user goes to Amazon and they search for some kind of dog food thing, and then they go to petco.com. Well, if Petco and Amazon, it's hypothetical, but if they participate in the same ad network and use third-party cookies to track that user between those sites, now Petco knows, hey, this person is interested in dog food. How do I know that? I know that because the ad network that's rendering my ads has tracked that user across the two sites. So this is where third-party cookie phase out becomes really relevant this year, because Google Chrome, the world's most popular web browser across Android phones and desktops, is going to start phasing those cookies out. So you will no longer, these ad networks will no longer be able to say, yeah, this user is the same user who did that Amazon search and is now showing up at Petco. There will have to be some other way to do that, but it will not involve tracking that user. So that's like the long and short story, Cameron. The two big takeaways. Oh, sorry, I was just going to summarize.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Cameron, I didn't mean to talk over you. The two big takeaways: cookies are invented for the purpose of keeping track of return visitors to your site, and the third-party cookie was created to allow websites to track those same users across different websites.
Fantastic. Thanks for that overview, Dave. That's really helpful to set the context. And Karen, just to bring you in for a second, as you talk about the last couple of decades that you've spent in the digital space for analytics and marketing, what role have cookies played in your experience historically? So forgetting about what's about to happen, are they central? Are they just kind of an afterthought? How reliant have marketers been on cookies up to this point from your experience?
So I'll give you a fun fact about me. In the beginning of my marketing career, one of my first jobs was at DoubleClick. This was like in 1999. And I worked on the marketing team for DoubleClick. And one of my tasks was maintaining the website. And I was asked to create a mechanism where people could opt out of DoubleClick tracking, which was basically setting a cookie in their browsers that said, don't show ads to this user. So has third-party cookie been important to my career over the last couple of decades? Absolutely. It really kicked it off. And even before I was working in data, I was already concerned with tracking and tracking across websites. But yeah, so definitely seeing a lot of change since then.
Awesome. Now, Dave, you had mentioned the distinction between first-party and third-party cookies, and I think that's important for us to keep in mind in this discussion. Let me just jump straight to the hyperbole. Cookies are dead. We're at a cookie apocalypse, and all cookies are going away. Is that just clickbait, or is that closer to the reality?
That's clickbait, Cameron. So what's happening now is not that all cookies are disappearing. First-party cookies remain totally intact, and that's true for the most privacy-sensitive browsers, including Apple's Safari, and will remain true for Google's Chrome and for Microsoft's Edge browser. First-party cookies, meaning you will absolutely be able to track return visitors to your websites as long as you're only tracking them within that one website. Not a problem at all. That is not being phased out. And this, from ObservePoint's data, which, by the way, we audit about 600 million cookies per month, every month with all the customer websites that we audit. So we've got a pretty good sample of the world's internet cookies space. About 60% of all the cookies we audit are first-party cookies. So those are all going to stay intact, no change at all in the behavior as they are behaving today.
Awesome. And as we think about how browsers have then looked at that space, well, Karen, let me ask you, because you were providing people some of the earliest ways to opt out of cookies and to control their experiences. Obviously, data privacy has become a bigger and bigger concern and need, and even a right for citizens around the world. GDPR rolled out and went live in 2018. That was a big shift for the market in general. And then we started to see browsers other than Chrome pull up and start to react to this. From your perspective and your experience over the last decade or so, how has just this move towards a more private internet experience in general, how has that affected marketers and how they do their job, and how have you seen people reacting to that experience?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest shifts we saw was, for a while, before GDPR and the consent management, it was really easy, or relatively easy, to measure the impact of Facebook campaigns on your conversions using third-party cookies, and that has really pulled away in terms of a capability, and people have questioned their investment on Facebook, and over the last, if we look past the decade, as well as on other social media and different ad platforms, because of the ability to opt out of this tracking has created a lot of blind spots for marketers. And I think that a lot of the capabilities that we're starting to see, and that we're going to see even more prominently, are how we bring first-party data back into those ad platforms so that we can understand the impact on our conversions of our media. So those are the biggest shifts that have been happening over the last 10 years.
Yeah, and as we've seen different players in the technology space react to those undercurrents of a more privacy-centric experience for people online. Obviously, this isn't the first move toward deprecating third-party cookies or just making a stricter experience. We saw, 7+ years ago, Apple with ITP, what is it, Intelligent Tracking Prevention, and then subsequently Firefox with ETP, Enhanced Tracking Protection, come out and start just blocking third-party cookies default without you setting up anything or doing anything. So this is, in a lot of ways, not something new. And that's one of the main points I want to drive home today, is that while this is a big shift, Dave mentioned the browser share that Chrome has, and it definitely is the biggest as far as just people using that browser. It's not the first to make this move. We've seen these shifts happen over the last several years. And for many of you out there, many marketers have been already in the process of adapting. It's like, yes, I need to deliver great experiences. Yes, I still have 40% of my cookies, as Dave mentioned, that are third party on my website, but I also need to make sure that works even as people are engaging with the strictest browser experiences. Then, as we were all aware of, I'm going to go ahead and share out my screen again. Hopefully this works without too much issue.
Cameron, before you do
Yeah,
that,
go ahead.
I want to say that one of the things that we work on is, even with limited data, if we have people opting out, we still do have data we can work with from a marketing standpoint, and we want that data to be the best quality data possible. And so with a lot of the app tracking limitations, we work with the mobile measurement platform. So like an AppsFlyer or a Branch, directly with the ad platform representatives on the post-fact data and on what data we can get back about our users, and integrating data between one system and another system with the data that we're allowed to capture, we're allowed to use in our marketing. And so I just wanted to mention that in the context of the points that you're making as well.
Yeah, that's great context. And maybe we'll dig into that a little bit more as we go forward, but there are alternatives. Just because certain cookies are being blocked or will be blocked in the future doesn't mean there aren't lots of other ways to track and engage and measure your customers as they interact with your digital properties. Now, to dive in specifically, this webinar is focused on the changes that are happening in Chrome, because they're happening right now on the biggest browser in the world, already starting to be tested and rolled out to a small subset of their users. And the expectation is that'll go much more broadly. Just real quick, as a resource, we look at the original announcement from the team over at Chrome. It came out in January of 2020, and they said that they plan to phase out third-party cookies. Now, they didn't exactly say what they meant by phase out and how all-encompassing that would be, but they did say their original intention was to do that in 2 years. Now, I checked the calendar earlier today, and I believe we're not in 2022. We're now in 2024, so they have had a bit of fits and starts and some hiccups, but by all indications, this is starting to move forward. In fact, prior to this announcement, they rolled out what they call the Privacy Sandbox. And if any of you aren't familiar with the Privacy Sandbox, a lot of great resources have been made available by Google. If you go to privacysandbox.com, you can get all the information about the Privacy Sandbox. Dave, from a high level, what is the Privacy Sandbox, and what is the purpose of putting together this initiative by the folks over at Google?
Yeah, great question. So Privacy Sandbox is, depending on if you take a cynical view of Google or a generous view of Google, it could be one of two different things. One is, the charitable view is that this is designed to protect user privacy online while still being able to deliver relevant advertising content. The cynical view is that Google is the world's biggest advertiser and has the most revenue to lose in the event of being unable to track users across their web experiences online. And so, but just to fulfill both of those objectives, Google has designed a replacement for third-party cookies called Privacy Sandbox, where instead of tracking user activity on the server side, they are now tracking user activity on the client side. In other words, in the browser, Chrome in this case, on your computer, Google will now store your interests. Then, when you visit a site that participates in the Google Ad Network and presumably other ad networks as they roll out support for Privacy Sandbox, that site, to decide which advertisements to serve or which media to serve to users, can actually ask the browser through a browser API called the Interests API that is part of the Privacy Sandbox to say, hey browser, what kinds of topics is this user interested in? And there's about 400 or 500 different topics in what they call the taxonomy of interest groups that will allow these advertising networks to say, oh, this person's interested in dog food, like as an example, or pet ownership. And then you can serve relevant ads that way. So Privacy Sandbox, in a nutshell, is a privacy-first way of still tracking user interests, but anonymously. They go to great lengths to say, look, you can know what this person's interested in, but you can't know who they are. In other words, their identity is concealed from you.
Excellent. So if I'm going to restate that, in fact, using Google's own language, the Privacy Sandbox initiative aims to create technologies that both protect people's privacy online and give companies and developers tools to build a thriving digital business. And I think that's their way of saying we're trying to have our cake and eat it too. We're trying to be more privacy centric, but we're trying to not do it. What is the word they used in their original announcement? A blunt force approach. They really took a shot at Apple and Safari when they said, yeah, this isn't what anybody really wanted. Yes, they want more privacy, but they want it done in a nuanced, thoughtful way. And I think that's part of what the Privacy Sandbox has become. Now, to be even more explicit, the Privacy Sandbox really is a collection of initiatives. It's not just one thing. It's not just, okay, Chrome is blocking third-party cookies, deal with it. It's here's all of the APIs and other factors that we know that will take that nuanced and thoughtful approach. Dave, because you're a little bit more technical than I am for sure, there's a couple of interesting things I want to drill in very specifically and get definitions for. One is this idea of chips or partitioned cookies, and the other one is this idea of related websites sets. They're two of many of the initiatives, but I think they're two of the most important ones for marketers to understand. So first, tell us a little bit about what are partitioned cookies.
Yes, partitioned cookies, or chips, which is cookies having independent partition state, which is a nice little pun on chocolate chips, chocolate chip cookies, is a mechanism that allows publishers who use third-party cookies to continue using third-party cookies, but without the ability to track users across sites. So this is a great solution for vendors that you install on your web pages who don't actually need to track users across sites, but they still need third-party cookies to deliver the functionality that they're delivering. I think a great example of this would be like a voice of the customer interaction tool or a support chat tool that you could embed in your app. Those tools normally need some kind of third-party cookie so that they can tell, hey, this is a returning visitor, and I can load up their chat history from their previous session. But some of those tools use third-party cookies to do that. So Google is allowing them to specify, hey, this cookie, it's a third-party cookie, but it's partitioned. It can only be used on this site. And if this same user goes to a different site that uses this same technology, those Google Chrome will consider those to be two independent, partitioned, separated cookies. And so the functionality can still work even though it's using third-party cookies. So you can kind of consider it like an exception to the third-party cookie phase-out rule. But notice, importantly, the third-party cookie cannot be used to track the user across sites. That user will appear as a brand new user when that user navigates from one site to the next, even if that tool uses a third-party cookie.
Wow. So the hyperbole I've been hearing is even worse than I thought, because it's not even all third-party cookies are going away. It's some third-party cookies are going away, but I also have a way to keep them around if I need them to function in a certain way. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And we're just barely starting to see these cookies show up, these partitioned chips cookies in our data. And ObservePoint will be launching a feature so that if you use ObservePoint to audit your site, you'll be able to tell exactly which of your vendors are using partitioned cookies and which ones aren't. And this is important because if you have a vendor using third-party cookies that are not partitioned, those cookies will stop working when Chrome finishes rolling out this phase-out. But if you have third-party cookies which are partitioned, those will continue to work just like they are today after the third-party cookie phase-out finishes.
So I think the underlying theme that I'm hearing is that Google really doesn't care about third-party cookies or not. They care about cross-site tracking and sharing information about consumers and web citizens across domains, across experiences, and they're trying to control that more specifically, but still allow you to offer the functionality you need for your website to actually work. Dave, in your opening, you actually mentioned that in the beginning of the internet, we had a lot of cookies and they did a lot of things. And it's not just for advertising and it's not just for retargeting. A lot of it are cookies that happen on a website for a specific reason. It just happens to be set by another domain than the website you're actually on. In fact, I think you had told me you had data as far as of the Observe Point customers, we keep track of a lot of the categorization they do of their cookies, especially for consent and their consent management platforms. Obviously, one of those things is strictly necessary. The cookies that are needed in order for this website experience to function and function well. Are those all first-party cookies, or do we ever see third-party cookies creep into that categorization?
That's a great question, Cameron. So, using the GDPR terminology of cookie categorization, one of the most commonly, one common category is what they call strictly necessary or functional. They have different words for these. We were surprised to learn that many websites categorize some of their strictly necessary cookies, which are actually third-party cookies. A little bit surprising, something like 40 to 60%, depending on the website.
Oh, wow.
Of their so-called strictly necessary cookies are actually third-party.
Wow. So there definitely are a lot of cookies out there that are third party that need to continue to function in order to provide good website experiences. And I know Google has provided, as they're doing their testing, if you haven't heard already, they started testing 1% of Chrome traffic back in January. So it's been up and running for a number of weeks now. But they're also aware that not everybody's ready for this. And so there need to be adaptations and there are ways to get exceptions. So for example, if you're in Chrome and you're part of that 1% that's being tested, and all of a sudden you're struggling and having a problem with your browser, Chrome's going to have some ways of artificially analyzing that and knowing, okay, this looks like you may be struggling. Should we opt you out of the 1% for now on this website until you can have a better experience? Have we seen any examples of that, Dave, or is that something that people can test to know where they're at? Are they in the 1%?
Yes, we'll probably need to share a link after the show, but there is a way to determine if you've been selected as a random trial in the dial-up of the cookie, third-party cookie phase-out. And there are ways to go ahead and opt in right now so you can test your site.
Awesome. Now, this brings me to another question. And Karen, I know you worked with a lot of big brands over the course of your career. We said that one of the primary reasons that Google and Chrome are making this move is because they're trying to prevent the tracking of individuals across websites. But there are some websites, some brands that you've worked with that have many, many different domains. I think of Gap, and they've got Gap and Banana Republic and Athletica. They've got Marriott, that's got the core Marriott properties, but then all the Westin properties that they got through the acquisition, like St. Regis. These are things that brands need to be able to measure across their own properties. First of all, have you seen that? Is that something that brands you're working with today, is that a problem they're trying to solve to get a more holistic view across their domains? And how have they done that historically?
That's a really good question, Cameron. In fact, we have a request form here, and I just recently removed the field where it requires you to enter a URL because so many experiences are going across so many URLs, so it doesn't make sense to just capture one URL. But in terms of like getting that overall picture, the how and the mechanism and the way to orchestrate the sites, I mean, I don't know if I can go in, like, I don't know how applicable one brand is to another brand. But I do see that, I do see the challenge there. And I do think that more consolidation is happening. I think one of the things you could look at is some of the media consolidation, where like all of these streaming sports, all these places that are streaming sports are trying to come together to have one place where you can find all your stream sports. So things like this are like at the high level are where people are going to have to start moving toward.
Yeah. And Chrome is obviously aware that these brands exist. In fact, Google gets a lot of their biggest ad dollars from these large conglomerations of websites and brands that have multiple properties. And so they've also provided one of their sandbox proposals is this thing called RWS, Related Website Sets. Dave, can you give us just a quick overview of what a related website set is and what it's for?
Yeah, very quickly, like we said before, Google has no interest in stopping you from tracking your users in your sites. Well, what if your sites are actually multiple brands? For example, think about Gap. Gap is a parent company to many retail brands, including Banana Republic and others. Google has no interest in stopping Gap from preventing from tracking their users across the brands that they own. And so you can actually submit a request to Google to say, hey, I own these 7 domains. They're all part of my brand. I can prove it to you. I would like you to please allow third-party cookies to be shared between these brands. And if Google, in their benevolence, approves your request, then you'll be added to a list that Chrome will then allow third-party cookies to be shared between these websites.
Awesome. So in general, and I think kind of to wrap up the entire discussion around the privacy sandbox, yes, Chrome is finally moving toward their long-awaited deprecation of third-party cookies, some third-party cookies. And they're doing it in a way that still allows brands to continue to do the measurement they need, to continue to deliver great experiences, to continue to have functionality of their website work as expected. But the big kind of overriding themes are a more privacy-centric experience, and specifically preventing cross-site linking of user data in ways that shouldn't be happening and aren't appropriate. With that said, and I know part of the kind of the theme of the whole website today was not just what is happening. I think many people are aware of some of these bits and pieces. Hopefully we've put together a broader picture for you to understand the landscape, but it's now, what do I do? Now that we're in March of 2024, that we've already had 2 months of this testing going on. Last I heard, it's still at 1%. We don't know exactly when and how Google's going to be ramping up, but we know they will be ramping up. And the plan is in the second half of the year, we're going to get to 100% at some point. Karen, let me go to you first. As you're advising the clients that you're working with, as far as preparing for this 100% landscape, where now all of Chrome will be blocking most third-party cookies, what are some of the pieces of advice you're giving to them as far as how to prepare now, so it's not just a shock and awe campaign come September or October?
Yeah, well, and it's not just now, it's been something like you're sharing, like this news came out in 2020. So we've been working with our clients for many years to help them address what's happening with third-party deprecation. We have been pushing for the use of first-party data for media optimization for many years, not just because third parties are being deprecated, but because as those capabilities become available in the ad platforms, they actually let us run much more impactful media for our clients, because it's based on actual business data and we can drive actual business results, whereas third-party cookie tracking, though quite cool that we can have insight into what people are doing on other sites, is not always as close to a business outcome for our clients. I want to say that the privacy sandbox, a lot of the ideas coming out of that are turning into features and guidance that Google is providing to marketers for how they can prepare for third-party deprecation and take on new features into how they run their media. So if you think about these being replacements for third-party cookie, I don't think that's the best way to think about it. I think it's a change. We have to change how we're doing our marketing, and that's really the advice that we're leading our clients with.
Yeah, I know that the IAB came out just a number of weeks ago and said, hey, we've reviewed all the specs and the information that Google's made available, and we can't do all the things we used to do. We can't do rate limiting, and we can't do lookalike modeling, and this is going to change everybody's world. And Google's response was, yes, that's intended. That's not a bug, it's a feature. We want the world to change, not because we want to hurt or harm or disable the ability of marketers and advertisers to do their job effectively, but because we want them to do it in a more privacy-centric way. And Karen, you mentioned this push for a greater focus on first-party data, being able to understand not just what is the data I get from third-party cookies or I buy from external sources, but what's the data that consumers are willing to share with me directly. And I know there's also this term zero-party data out there that many people have heard of, but not everybody's completely clear on. Can you give us just a quick distinction? What's the difference between first-party data and zero-party data?
Yeah, so I think that there's probably going to be debate. Of course, in marketing, our terms definition are terrible, but the way I think about first-party data, this is information that we're collecting on our own websites, associated with our own domains, and people are, as they become customers, this is our first-party data. I think about zero-party data as voluntarily, like information that people visiting our sites or engaging with our marketing are giving to us. So you might see if the marketer website can't tell from using third-party cookies that you're interested in purchasing pet dog food, maybe they'll just be a little survey, hey, what are you interested in purchasing today? Dog food? And then that's how they'll get that interest from you using zero-party data.
Yeah, so to restate that and make sure I'm understanding it. So
Yeah.
first-party data is all the data you collect on your web properties and experiences about your customers, about how they're interacting, how they're behaving, what they're showing interest in. Zero-party data is a subset of first-party data, but it's the data that's explicitly given to you from your customers voluntarily. They sign up for a loyalty program. They fill out a survey, as you mentioned, other ways in which they explicitly give you that information. And I think you're right. That's one of the most important things for us to be focusing on as just a marketing community in general is as our dependence on third-party cookies and by extension, third-party data starts to fade away, we need to be building more of those direct relationships. And then where there is a value exchange, where you're offering something meaningful, consumers have actively said, yes, I'm willing to share my data as long as I have a recognized value exchange. Now, as we look at how people have been preparing for this moment, because it's not like Google didn't give us more than enough lead time to know this is going to happen, but also what they should be doing over the next several months. Dave, I know you were looking specifically at data around how third-party cookie prevalence has changed over the last several months, month to month. Are we seeing a significant downtick where people are starting to wipe third-party cookies completely off their website and just not have them there? Or are there still a bunch sticking around that we need to deal with?
Great question. We got interested in this question just to measure the overall industry's response to Google's announcements of phasing out third-party cookies. So I took a look at our data over the last 12 months to see, hey, of all the cookies that ObservePoint audited, which again is in the hundreds of millions per month of cookies, how many of them are third-party, and is that trend changing? And I mentioned before that about 40% of all the cookies we see are third-party, 40 to 50% depending on the month and the website. And this has been flat over the last 12 months.
Wow.
We expected to see a decrease, but what this tells me is that either there's a big pivot toward partitioned cookies, which I doubt because we rarely see those, or en masse, websites have not taken this seriously and are not just getting rid of third-party cookies. And I think they're in for a rude awakening when Google starts to dial this thing up.
Yeah,
that's
and I'll
really
be. Oh, go ahead, Karen.
I was like, that's super interesting. So I definitely was interested in this stat, and I'm so glad that you shared it today. And I wonder, because some part of this is, like I was saying, this is change management, and I'm sure many marketers are looking for what they're going to change to from using third-party cookies. But are they telling the website, hey, I don't need those third-party cookies anymore? I think maybe some are not fully transitioned, and then some might just be a change management, because I would think removing some of those third-party cookies from your website would improve performance and that's better outcomes for you. So that's super interesting, Dave. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, on Median, we see dozens and dozens of cookies on every website we scan. So the question is, yeah, if you don't have all of those cookies and the technologies, tags, and scripts that are setting those cookies behind the scenes, does that improve performance? It's something that you certainly should be testing, since you know that even if they're there in 9 months from now, they're going to be blocked and they're not going to do you a lot of good. So you might as well clean up that digital residue that's going to be left behind and not really doing you any good. All it's doing is sitting there and wasting space on your code and your pages. I'm going to take a little bit more of a. Oh, did you have something to add?
Want to insert? Yeah, one more thought on that topic of third-party cookies don't seem to be disappearing from websites. If I were a digital marketer, and Karen and I have talked about this a little bit as well, I would definitely be running an ObservePoint audit on my site today just to gather a list of what are all the third-party cookies, and this would become a checklist for me. I'd say, okay, I've got 37 third-party cookies across my site. I'm just going to go right down that list. Do I need this cookie? What would happen if this cookie disappeared tomorrow because Chrome started blocking it? And then I would have a little checklist. I mean, this will definitely keep you busy for a few weeks to go down that list. But I think it's necessary to at least prepare so you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, you say a few weeks. I know some of the organizations we're working with, we're talking about massive companies that have to reach across department and find out who owns that cookie and who set the technology. And it can take sometimes months or quarters, depending on just how much bureaucracy you're dealing with. So the time to start is now or yesterday. Hopefully people are doing that. I think I'm going to take a little bit more of a charitable approach and hope that at least some of those remaining cookies that haven't gone down are okay, that they're okay if they don't work, or they believe that the partners they're working with that do set those will still function once all of these things roll out. Obviously, and I want to reiterate this point, this isn't the beginning of third-party cookie deprecation. It's kind of the end. We've already had Apple, which owns, Safari has roughly 20, 25, 30% of the browser market share. So if there's certain functionality in cookies that aren't working on your website now, with Safari, then you need to make sure those experiences, and you have for the last 7 years, you need to make sure those are working well. So my hope is that there's at least some of this analysis being done. Unfortunately, as we have discussions with customers and others in the market, a lot of people are just kind of ignoring it, or have been hoping that it hasn't been causing a problem. But when we get to, like I said, Q3, Q4 of this year, it's going to hit all at once. So you better be well prepared. Karen, I know that part of this preparation isn't just what is happening on your website, what do you have in your control, but it's also who are the partners you're working with, who are the ad platforms that you're partnered with in order to deliver great experiences, whether you're a publisher or an advertiser. What is your advice to people as they look at that landscape of all the different partners I'm working with? How should I be coordinating? How should I be thinking about preparing?
That's a really good question. And I think it really boils down to integration, data integration, first party data integration into every single platform. And some of the platforms have this and have had it for a while. And then some are adding new features, alternative ways to do marketing, different ways to do targeting that you can try in betas. And then some technologies will probably come out, or probably have already, that are going to have never used third-party cookies for marketing optimization. So it's very platform by platform. It's very much integration. I think a lot of marketers, our practice round was the Google Universal Analytics sunset, where Google gave us lead time, but we didn't quite know what it was going to look like after Universal Analytics went away with GA4, or do we need to choose a totally different platform? Well, it turns out in most cases, if you might have chosen a different platform, but you probably should also have GA4, because that's so tied into Google's marketing ecosystem, and the integration into the ad platform with that first party data you have in GA4 is so important. So yeah, so it's just, I think it's knowing where you're using the third-party cookies, which ObservePoint can absolutely help with, because they can show on your site where you have what those pixels are, and then just like methodically going platform by platform, seeing like what's the option to use first-party data, what are the other ways that they're showing I can optimize the media. Let me try those. Let me see what that impact is, so I can understand the impact of these changes, what it's going to be on my marketing investment.
Yeah, and you mentioned something there that I realize there may be a bit of a conflation here, the way people are thinking about this. So I want to clarify with definitions real quick. We've talked about first and third party cookies, and that's specifically what Chrome is looking at, the cookies that are being set. There's also first and third party technologies, and then there's first and third party data. From a technical aspect, Dave, can you just give us a quick distinction as far as the difference between a first and third party cookie versus a first and third party technology? Are they one-to-one, or there's different mixing and matching there?
Yeah, not all third-party technologies even use cookies, let alone third-party cookies, and but all third-party cookies do come from third-party technologies. So that's kind of the Venn diagram, It's like not all rectangles are squares, but all squares are rectangles. A third-party technology really just refers to any technology that you have installed on any of your pages on your site that is built and operated by a company that is not your own. Meaning they have their own data that they collect, they have their own operations, they have their own trademarks and domains and everything else. They're very easy to spot when you run an ObservePoint audit, because they have different domains and they have icons you would recognize for brands that you would know. Also, not all third-party technologies generate third-party cookies. For example, you may be a Google Analytics or an Adobe Analytics user. Those technologies do not use third-party cookies. They have no need to. They're only designed to track your users within your one website anyway, so they have no need to track users across site.
Awesome. And yeah, I was part of the reason I bring that up is one of the questions we've had is how do these changes impact our ability to measure and optimize marketing campaigns? And you mentioned specifically analytics. So Karen, you have a lot of experience. You mentioned the migration from GUA to GA4. As people are thinking about their measurement, not cross-site targeting or retargeting or advertising in any way, simply measuring the people that do come to their website, does this create a disruption, or is it business as usual? How should they be thinking about that? Should they be concerned?
Well, I think it's part of just a disruption trend that's been happening over the last decade or so. So think about if you have a consent manager on your website, that's a disruption in terms of the data that you're able to collect. Think about how just the search experience is changing in general. We have the search generative experiences using the generative AI, a lot of, they call it zero-click searches. So people may not even come over to your website anymore after searching in Google. So this is another disruption to your measurement. How do we talked about the Apple disruption. We have emails going out. If as someone in the Apple ecosystem is clicking on your email, some of those ID tracking parameters are no longer there. And then we have the third-party cookie disruption. So like if you're doing MTA, that can be really disrupted right now because once all the third-party cookies are gone, that's going to be highly disrupted in some cases where you're relying on third-party cookies for that. So what we are doing is we're taking, we call it a three-pronged approach, and we're looking at integrating different ways of measuring media based on the decision to be made. This is very different than what we've done in the past, which was really trying to get to that single source of truth and have everything aligned to one number. This is just not really right now. That's not practical, especially with all the change that's happening. We need to look at things through so many different lenses and using different measurement technologies and understanding what is the decision to be made. What do we need to know? What's the best way to know that in this circumstance, rather than just saying everything should be accountable to one number in one data source.
Yeah, I guess the big takeaway I hear you saying is there's disruption happening all over the place. It's not just this change in Chrome, although that's just the one that we're feeling very acutely right now and are concerned about over the next couple of months. But there's changes happening all over the ecosystem. And even if, for example, I've implemented Google Analytics with a first-party cookie that won't be blocked, that can measure what my users are doing on my website, that there's still other disruptions separate from what Chrome is doing. For example, a lot of the legislation we hear coming out of the EU and is collecting that data and simply storing it and sending it to Google Analytics, a third-party technology. Is that considered sharing data? And I'm not here to give you legal advice, but that's something you're going to want to be clear on what your stance is as a business is. What technologies that you're partnering with should and can have the data I'm sharing based on the jurisdictions and the legislation that happens in those jurisdictions. And I think that's because of exactly that trend you just mentioned, Karen, that there's a lot of changes and we have to be nimble right now, because this is maybe the fastest changing digital landscape I've seen in my 2 decades working in this industry. One other distinction I want to make sure we make, because I brought it up earlier, is we talked about the difference between third-party cookies and third-party technologies. Karen, can you just give us a description about third-party data and what's the difference between first-party data and third-party data? And is third-party data only collected from third-party cookies, or is there a bit of a mismatch there as well?
So what I'm thinking about, I just tell you from my experience, if we are going to be launching a new ad platform, sometimes we'll be asked as an analytics team to put that ad platform's pixel on our client's website. And in a place where we want to, that's like where we want to track the event that we want to optimize our media to, whether it's, well, it's usually like a purchase or a lead, something really close to a business impact event on the website. This is what I'm thinking about when I think about replacing third-party data that's coming off of that pixel with first-party data that's actually measured by your own systems, your own CRM or your own e-commerce platform, and bringing that order data back into the ad platform as first-party data that can be optimized against. That's what I'm thinking about.
Awesome. So if I'm to restate that, first-party data is data you collect by the systems you employ on your properties and your experiences. And third-party data is data collected by other people that can then be shared or purchased by really anybody in the ecosystem. So if I go out to a DMP and I want to do lookalike modeling and I want to reach a whole bunch of people I've never seen before, they've never come to my website, so I can't measure them in the first party context, I can still go buy those audiences. And we've seen that ecosystem start to go away for a long time. You can have first party data you're tracking on your website being tracked through third-party cookies, but there's also a lot of other things they're trying to do to track across domains, which is exactly what Chrome is trying to stop in the first place. Yeah. There's a lot of nuance there. Hopefully, I know that a lot of folks on the line already know these things, but I want to just make sure we're clear, because we are using terminology that's similar but distinctly different. The one other thing I'll just throw in the mix to add more insanity to it is second-party data. It's something I think we don't talk about nearly enough as a market, and quite simply, second-party data is somebody else's first-party data that you've partnered with strategically in order to have sets like that. So think about when Delta has a partnership with Amex to give me my Delta Amex card, they need to share at least some level of consumer data to make sure I have a good experience on both sides of that wall. I think that's a strategic area, along with first-party data and zero-party data, Karen, that you've already talked about. The second-party ecosystem of creating strategic partnerships where it's above board, it's recognized, but it adds value to consumers, where you can offer better experiences by having even more rich data sets. All right, I'm just taking a quick look at the clock. We're about 9 minutes to the top of the hour. We do have a number of questions that have rolled in. So if you have additional questions to what we're going to roll through here, please speak up. We'll try to answer as many of them as we can. We've already hit a few of them. Karen, I want to throw this one to you. We've already hit on it a little bit, but maybe give me just a little more clarity. Somebody's specifically concerned with how first-party cookies will interact with Google for campaign optimization. Any response to how people are optimizing campaigns and how it relates to these changes in cookies?
Well, it's hard just from that question to understand what you're trying to get at, because as Cameron's explaining, the Google Analytics on your own website is first party. It's using first party cookies, and that's first party data. And if your campaigns are in Google Ads, for example, you can set up those Google Analytics events to be optimized against, so your campaigns are optimized against those data. So that's great. That's a nice situation. But it's when we get into other platforms where things get a little murkier in terms of how do we bring that first party data into those platforms. Meta has Conversions API, and we have to use Conversion API to bring our first party data into the Meta platform. And so that could come from your, like I was saying, your CRM or your shopping site to optimize your campaigns against that first party data.
Yeah, and I think part of the distinction there is what you mean by optimization. What does it mean to optimize a campaign? So maybe whoever asked that question could add in a little bit of a follow-up. But for me, I mean, when you think about optimization, you're talking about the conversion rate optimization of those ad campaigns, in which case, yeah, you'll be able to capture conversion data and optimize toward that. Or are you talking about optimizing the spend and capping spend so people don't see too many of your same ads, or that you're optimizing it based on being able to retarget to lots of your existing audiences? I think half of that is starting to go away very significantly. The measurement on your own properties is still there and at your disposal. Okay, another question, and Dave, maybe you can speak to this. People are wondering how much publishers and just the ecosystem in general are adopting the privacy sandbox. Is there any way for us to see how many people, for example, have partitioned cookies? How many people is everybody getting those interests set on their browsers? Is it only happening for the 1%? What does that look like, and how do we know?
We've been desperately looking for some messaging from the other big ad networks like Meta, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Bing, and none of them have said anything in the affirmative or in the negative about whether they plan to adopt the Topics API from Privacy Sandbox. So that's one answer. We don't know. And I actually have no idea whether they're going to, but it seems like they're going to lose a lot of ad revenue if they don't. But also, none of these networks want to be beholden to Google to directly provide them the information. Today, with third-party cookies, they can collect it themselves. Under Google, under the Privacy Sandbox, they're beholden to Google to provide it to them. So short answer, we haven't heard. And I think the next 3 to 6 months are going to be very interesting that way.
So they're left with two bad choices, and they get to decide which one's best for their business.
Yep.
Along those same lines, from a browser perspective, we know that Chrome is actually built on the Chromium framework, which is an open source option. And there are other browsers that use that same backend system. Are other browsers that are using the same backend, are they also adopting these things? Can they adopt these things? What have we seen so far?
So the biggest browser that uses the same rendering engine as Chrome is Microsoft Edge. And Microsoft has also not made any statement about whether they do or do not want to build the privacy sandbox. The other big browser we need to be concerned about is Safari from Apple. And Safari does have some open source development that they do. And their developers have been very clear within the last year saying, we will not build the interest topics API that's specified in the privacy sandbox into Safari.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised that if Google gets a great response in in a year or so from now, that everything's running really smoothly, if you don't see more of them adopt at least some of these standards and proposals. I also want to make sure that it's clear that these are just proposals at this point. There's a reason Google Chrome is only testing 1% of their traffic. It's because what we have now is not by any means set in stone. We are dealing with very soft clay. There's still a lot of advertisers that are giving a ton of feedback to Google to refine these things. There's still a lot of website owners that are providing their feedback. I think one of the most important things that we can get you to come away from today's discussion is that you need to test. You need to understand what is your exposure, but don't freak out too much about the final result, because I don't think any of us know or can project out exactly what the world will look like in October, November, December of this year. Maybe one or two other questions to wrap us up here. We've got, once third-party cookies are officially sunset, what happens if a business still has some on their website? Will they simply not work? Will they be fined? I'm throwing that out to either one of you. Who wants to take that?
Go ahead, Dave.
Okay, I can answer the second part. Will they be fined? No. This is just Google saying we're not going to allow
Google's not a regulatory body. Yeah.
Yet. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Will they simply not work? Yes, but with the nuance that I believe that most experiences will not just break because they've already been working with the 20% of your user base that likely is using Safari today, which is already blocking third-party cookies. And so very likely you don't have any major user visible breakage if you do nothing right now. However, your data, especially the data that tracks new users or that does conversion, might look bad, or your performance might start to decline if you don't do something about it.
Yeah, and Dave, I believe you and the ObservePoint development team recently released an enhancement that allows people to test the what if. What does it look like once we get to 100%?
That's right. As of a few weeks ago, you can run an ObservePoint audit on your site, a journey or an audit on your site. And you can tell ObservePoint, hey, yes, I want you to go ahead and simulate what my site will look like after Google rolls out the third-party cookie phase out.
Yeah, so there are tools out there to help you get prepared, to help you understand what is the experience right now and what will that experience look like a few months or quarters from now as this starts to roll out more specifically. All right, I know that we've got a handful of additional questions that have rolled in. We love the participation. I love to see people actively engaged and excited about this topic. We'll try to take all of those and respond offline if there's additional key themes or topics we haven't hit on. I know that both ObservePoint and NP Digital have assets on their websites and their resource centers to help you get prepared, to help you understand the subject if you're just starting, and to help you know what that framework looks like as you roll forward into the rest of 2024. With all that said, Dave, Karen, loved having you on, loved the discussion. As you guys know, I could talk about this for hours on end, so I'm kind of sad we only have 1 hour. Before we wrap today, any final thoughts or guidance for our audience? Karen, I'll start with you.
Sure. So just a couple of things real quick. I think, we have pitched a brand recently that has many, many brands, and it's becoming easier to create many brands now than it was in the past. And so again, more disruption that's happening, and leveraging creative and creators and influencers and having them associated with a specific brand or product. Like, that's the type of change in marketing that I think we're going to see. And on the other side of that, I don't know if you folks have seen this, but I went to Costco yesterday and they're asking me to scan my card when I go into the store. Usually they just had people there looking, but now they're actually having data that I entered the store, not just data that I purchased in the store. And this is all their own data about their customers. And I think that we'll see more and more of this data collection happening so that because this first party data is so much more valuable now when we don't have third party data to rely on.
Absolutely. Dave, any final thoughts from you?
No, thanks so much for having me, Cameron.
Yeah, I loved having you both. So on behalf of myself, Cameron Cowan, Dave Smith, and Karen Bellin, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to turn it back over to Jasmine to wrap us up.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Cameron, Dave, and Karen for being here today and sharing so much knowledge with us. And thank you all of y'all for attending and being so engaged. Thank you again to Observe Point for sponsoring this webinar. As a reminder, this session will be available for on demand, and you will be receiving, a link to the on demand content within 24 hours. Before you go, I'd like to draw your attention to the session survey that is now available. We'd love to hear your feedback. Again, thank you all for being here with us today. We hope you have a great rest of your week.